Story 1. The Orphanage's Dark Secret. The sun was setting as Lisa arrived at the old orphanage, her heart filled with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Volunteering to help the children here seemed like the perfect way to give back to the community. The building stood tall, its faded bricks telling tales of decades past. Mrs. Thompson, the caretaker, greeted Lisa with a warm smile. "We're so glad to have you here, dear. The children will be thrilled to have someone new to play with." Lisa smiled back, her nerves easing as she followed Mrs. Thompson inside. The orphanage was bustling with activity, children laughing, playing, and studying. It felt like a warm, welcoming place. Days turned into weeks and Lisa settled into her routine of helping with chores, reading stories to the children, and organizing activities. But as she spent more time at the orphanage, she began to notice strange things. Whispers echoed through the empty halls when she was alone, and toys seemed to move on their own when she turned her back. The children, too, spoke in hushed tones of a hidden basement that no one dared to enter. One stormy night, as Lisa tucked the children into bed, she heard a faint, eerie wailing coming from below. Curiosity and concern mingled in her mind as she made her way down the creaky stairs to investigate. The basement was dark and musty, the air heavy with an unsettling chill. Lisa's heart raced as she shined her flashlight around, revealing dusty old furniture and cobweb-covered boxes. Then she saw it, a small hidden door tucked away in the corner. It seemed to beckon to her, its surface worn and weathered. With trembling hands, Lisa reached out and turned the rusty knob. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Lisa hesitated for a moment, her mind filled with thoughts of the children sleeping peacefully above. But her curiosity got the better of her, and she descended into the depths below. The air grew colder with each step, and a sense of dread settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Finally, she reached the bottom and found herself in a dimly lit chamber. The walls were lined with shelves filled with ancient books and strange arcane symbols. In the center of the room stood an ornate altar, its surface stained with what looked like dried blood. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. The orphanage had been built atop an ancient burial ground, and the spirits of the restless dead were seeking revenge. A cold wind swept through the chamber, carrying with it the anguished cries of the forgotten souls. Lisa's heart raced as she realized she was not alone. Ethereal figures materialized before her, their faces twisted in pain and rage. They reached out to her with spectral hands, their wails echoing in her ears. Terrified, Lisa stumbled backward, her mind reeling with fear. She knew she had to escape, to warn the others before it was too late. With a burst of adrenaline, she turned and sprinted up the stairs, the ghostly wails of the spirits following close behind. She burst into the main hall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Mrs. Thompson rushed to her side, concern etched on her face. "What happened, dear? Are you all right?" Lisa could barely speak, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "The basement, the spirits, we have to leave now." Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened in horror as she listened to Lisa's tale. Without hesitation, she ushered the children outside, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. As they fled into the night, Lisa glanced back at the orphanage one last time. In the darkness, she could see the faint outline of the spirits, their anguished cries fading into the distance. The orphanage's dark secret had been revealed, and Lisa knew that it was a horror that would haunt her dreams forever. Story 2. The Haunted Hospital Ward. Michael arrived at the old hospital with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Volunteering to help out at the abandoned ward seemed like a noble endeavor. But the building's dark history sent shivers down his spine. The hospital had been closed for decades, its crumbling walls holding the memories of countless patients who had suffered within its halls. As Michael stepped inside, the air seemed to grow heavy with the weight of the past. The once bustling corridors were now eerily silent, the only sound the echo of his footsteps on the worn linoleum floors. Mrs. Jenkins, the hospital's caretaker, greeted Michael with a warm smile. "We're so grateful for your help, young man. The old ward could use some fresh eyes." Michael smiled back, trying to shake off the unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. He spent his days cleaning, organizing, and reading to the patients, those who remained from a time long past. But as the nights fell and the hospital grew quiet, Michael began to notice strange things. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of his vision, and he heard faint whispers echoing through the empty halls. One night, as he made his rounds, Michael heard a cry for help coming from the abandoned wing of the hospital. Without hesitation, he followed the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. The abandoned ward was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Michael's flashlight illuminated rows of empty beds, their metal frames rusted and twisted. Then he heard it again, a faint agonized moan coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hall. With a sense of dread, Michael pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was freezing cold, the temperature dropping with each passing moment. In the corner, a figure lay on the bed, its form hunched and twisted in pain. "Help me," The figure whispered, its voice barely more than a whisper. Michael approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, he saw the figure's face, a patient from a bygone era, their eyes wide with fear and suffering. "What happened to you?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. The patient's story unfolded in a chilling tale of medical experiments gone wrong, of cruel treatments and untold horrors inflicted upon the helpless. Suddenly, the room was filled with the ghostly apparitions of the hospital's past patients. Their faces twisted in agony, they reached out to Michael with spectral hands, pleading for release from their eternal suffering. Terrified, Michael fled the room, the ghostly cries of the patients echoing in his ears. He raced through the darkened corridors, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, he burst out into the main hall, his heart pounding in his chest. Mrs. Jenkins rushed to his side, concern etched on her face. "What happened, dear? Are you all right?" Michael could barely speak, his mind reeling from the horrors he had witnessed. "The patients, the experiments, we have to leave now." Mrs. Jenkins listened to his tale with growing horror. Without hesitation, she led Michael outside, the hospital's dark history following close behind. As they fled into the night, Michael glanced back at the hospital one last time. In the darkness, he could see the faint outlines of the ghostly patients, their anguished cries fading into the distance. The haunted hospital ward had revealed its dark secrets, and Michael knew that it was a horror that would haunt him forever. Story 3, The Forest Preservation Curse. Emily signed up for a volunteer program to help preserve the ancient forest, eager to make a difference in the world. The forest, however, held a dark secret, one that would test her courage and sanity. As she arrived at the remote campsite nestled deep within the woods, Emily was struck by the forest's eerie beauty. Tall, ancient trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying in the gentle breeze. The other volunteers greeted her warmly, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of her stomach. The forest seemed to watch her with silent, unseen eyes, and the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. Days turned into weeks, and Emily worked tirelessly alongside the other volunteers to clear invasive species and maintain the trails. But as they delved deeper into the heart of the forest, strange things began to happen. Trees seemed to move when no one was looking, their branches twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. Whispering voices echoed through the undergrowth, their words unintelligible but filled with malice. One night, as Emily sat alone by the campfire, she heard the distant sound of drums beating in the darkness. The rhythm was hypnotic, drawing her in with a strange, otherworldly allure. Curiosity getting the better of her, Emily followed the sound deeper into the forest, her flashlight cutting through the dense underbrush. The drums grew louder and louder, their pounding echoing through the trees. Finally, Emily emerged into a small clearing, the ground covered in strange, arcane symbols. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient altar, its surface etched with images of grotesque, twisted creatures. A chill ran down Emily's spine as she realized the truth. The forest was cursed, its ancient guardians angered by the intrusion of outsiders. Before she could react, a figure emerged from the shadows, a spectral guardian of the forest, its eyes blazing with otherworldly fire. It spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth itself, warning Emily of the consequences of her actions. The forest demanded a sacrifice to appease its angered spirits, a soul to join its ranks and ensure the preservation of its dark secrets. Terrified, Emily fled back to the campsite, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to warn the other volunteers, but they laughed off her warnings as superstition. That night, as the drums beat a furious rhythm in the darkness, Emily heard the screams of her fellow volunteers echoing through the forest. Their voices were filled with terror and agony, their cries for help falling on deaf ears. In the morning, the campsite was empty. The other volunteers vanished without a trace. Emily knew then that she was alone, trapped in the cursed forest with no way out. Desperate and afraid, she made her way back to the clearing, the spectral guardian waiting for her with a malevolent grin. The forest's dark secret had been revealed, and Emily knew that she was doomed to join the ranks of the cursed, forever bound to the ancient trees that whispered her name in the wind.